And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited today to connect you with internationally best-selling author Puja Guha, here to give us the inside scoop on her gorgeous new book, Sirens of Memory. Puja, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. So Sirens of Memory is a combined psychological thriller, part historical, that starts out in Kuwait. It follows a woman who is in an abusive marriage, and this is prior to the first Gulf War, so in the early 90s. And when the Gulf War breaks out, she basically leaves her husband for dead and takes refuge in a Indian refugee camp. So there were 150,000 Indians in Kuwait during the Gulf War. And then there was this massive airlift on the part of the Indian government. So she gets out basically pretending to be an Indian woman with the help of this man at the camp. And fast forward 25 years, they have a real relationship. He's raised her daughter as his own. And life is really great, although she's definitely dealing with some PTSD and sort of repercussions of like bringing those memories back to the surface. But at that time, basically, it turns out that the abusive husband is still alive, and he finds them. And so comes and hunts them down, basically.
Well, the ups and downs. Well, I am here for it. I know we all are so excited and so curious to learn more. So let's get into it. But first, I just want to welcome everyone who is watching on Facebook, watching on YouTube, Murdered by the Books channels, my channels, Bitchy Bookworms, wherever you're watching, Mystery and Thriller Mavens, wherever you're watching from. Welcome. You're in the right place. This is the right time. And I can't wait for you to meet Puja and learn all about her book. Anissa, welcome to the conversation. She says, hello, Sarah and Puja. Anissa, always great to have you. Top Mystery and Thriller Maven there. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh my goodness, we have Bookstagrammer extraordinaire Stephanie Cooper, aka Fire Pit and Books. She is fabulous with her reviews. She's saying, hi, I always love Sarah's reviews. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure to have you as always. Susan Martin, welcome to the conversation. She says, hello, Susan, great to have you. Thanks for tuning in. Leslie saying, hello from Canada. We're international now. Leslie, welcome. Thanks for your signature Canadian hello. Always a pleasure to have you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So you know how this works. If you've got questions for Puja, this is your time to ask her anything about her book, ask her about Sirens of Memory, ask her about her writing process, ask her anything you've got weighing on your mind. Now is the time. This is the place. Get it going in the comments. She's holding nothing back today. So Puja, let's dive right in, shall we? So why this book right now? You're writing about an area that most of us have never been to. I've never been to. You yourself lived in Kuwait. Now you're living in Colorado, the wilds of Colorado, but you've lived in Kuwait. You lived in this neck of the woods, let's say. Why did you want to write a book that takes place there? Why this woman? Why this story? Give us the inside scoop.
Okay, so I mean, I think Kuwait and the Middle East, first of all, is like always with me. It's kind of this interesting thing. So I'm of Indian descent and have lived in Canada and the US and have all kinds of Indian things and American things and Canadian and Western things and pretty mixed up. And but living in Kuwait, basically from when I was 9 until I was 17, that will always be part of me and the Middle East in general. I did get to travel a lot around while we were living there, and I've always been fascinated by different parts of the region. But I think this particular book, so when I was a kid, so my parents and I were not in Kuwait during the Gulf War, but we were actually there before, and then we moved to Toronto when I was 2 and moved back when I was 9. So several years after the Gulf War. But those stories about friends and family members who did, get out in different ways, that is something I heard when I was a kid, and it just stayed with me. So, I have my dad's British friend who hid out in his attic until he could get evacuated. Several different family friends who were at home. Indians weren't really targeted by the Iraqis, but like, they still had to get out. People who drove out through Iraq over to Jordan and then eventually made it back to India. All kinds of stories of different moments of the Gulf War and how nobody thought that the invasion would happen. And so that was definitely with me throughout my life. And I think the moment I really thought of the story is actually I watched this Bollywood movie. It's called Airlift, and it was about the airlift of the 150,000 Indians back to India. And it just came to me basically watching this movie, like how incredibly significant that effort was and how many people, it's the biggest airlift in international history. And then from there, the idea of the story just sort of happened. This Kuwaiti woman who would be hiding in the camp and then who would be helped to get out by someone from the camp. And then just thinking about her is sort of where the story of the abuse and then escape and then the catching, the past catching up to her came from. I do think that, so many women have experienced different levels of assault, abuse, microaggressions, all kinds of different things. And somehow that, just hearing that in the news and reading about it and talking to friends, it just came out of me.
Ooh, well, I think what's really interesting about this story, aside from everything, is that there are those universal themes of survival, of women doing what they have to do, people doing what they have to do, in extraordinarily resourceful and sometimes desperate ways to survive whatever the personal circumstances are that they are trying to overcome. So whether you're trying to get airlifted out of Kuwait, whether you're trying to flee an abusive relationship, these are both individual and universal themes that you're talking about. And so the idea of a woman trying to assume the identity of a man's dead wife in order to get one of those seats of the 150,000 people being airlifted out to safety is fascinating. So Puja, this book has gotten some really, really great reviews. Andy Bartz, author of The Lost Night, The Herd, she said, this is harrowing and transportive. Sirens of Memories is an emotional tale of the strength we find in facing our own trauma and the beauty in rejecting victimhood. Fans of multicultural suspense and stories of women reclaiming their power should enjoy this unique and vivid journey. Andy was also on the show right after her book got picked by Reese Witherspoon for the book of the month. So amazing and rave review there. I'm plopping it into the comments in case anyone wants to check that out. Susan would like to know, did the Indians help to protect her identity so that she could be airlifted along with them in your book? So yeah, let's talk about that. She's not entitled, as a Kuwaiti woman, she's maybe not supposed to be on that one of those seats. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the people who do find out about her and her cousin who get out together definitely keep it quiet. For the most part, she and her cousin are able to sort of stay under the radar because there's so many people at the camp, and then there's so many languages in India that they sort of pretend not to speak Hindi, and which they don't. Of course, they don't speak Hindi, but they kind of get away with it because there's so many other languages being spoken at the camp. Some people sort of start to figure it out over time, but the couple of men who are running the camp protect her and her cousin, and as does the man who eventually becomes her new husband, and a couple of other people.
What was your research process like? Susan, thank you for the great question. And Pooja, thank you for the insight. What was your research process like of, I think we always see these humanitarian camps on TV, and we hear about people, being airlifted. We certainly just saw people being airlifted out of Afghanistan to safety just months ago. What was your research process into who gets a seat, who doesn't? How would you sneak on there? How would you go undercover? What is life like? I mean, what was that like for you?
So the biggest source for me in this case, and I was lucky enough to have access to it, is just, family friends who were there. So I don't have any direct connections to people who were in the camps, but enough people who visited, who stayed at home nearby. So the Indians in Kuwait broadly break out into two categories. Sort of the professional workforce. So context, Kuwait is like 650,000 people. At the time, the Gulf War, the overall population would have been close to 2 million. And so most of the people living there are expats. And there are tons of South Asians in general. And there's a large group of Indian professionals, but there are also quite a large group of sort of construction workers, housekeepers, drivers, different types of other day-to-day professions. And so for most of that group, their visas would have been procured by whoever their employer was. And a lot of them didn't even have passports and things like that. So a lot of that context I was able to get just from talking to family, friends, and things. And there is a lot of stuff online.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't give you the real nuanced details, but it is really helpful in terms of looking at okay, the first group of Indians got out by ship, and then most of them were airlifted from Jordan. And how did they get there? They drove through Iraq, all of that stuff. But the little nuances are, I think, what makes it real. So things like there would be
give us an
hawkers
example.
out in the street selling cigarettes, and and the Iraqi soldiers, most of them were like young kids, like 19, early 20s, maybe even younger, and they didn't have real shoes. Most of them, they were just wearing like flip-flops, basically. All of those types of things. I was really lucky to be able to talk to family, friends about that stuff. And I know it wasn't always easy for them to go back to
Yeah.
that time. So I really appreciate the time they spent and how much effort they helped me with.
Jenny Milchman and Raves that Sirens of Memory is a powerful peek behind the curtain of domestic life, country, and culture in the specificity of a war-torn time. Puja Guha uncovers the universal truths. Reveal, and I love that, again, talking about individuality and weaving that into universality. Very, very cool. And a rave review from that author. Crime Reads Raves that Guha's Sirens of Memory is a gripping and complex story that spans borders and eras. Did it feel intimidating to take on such a big topic, such a big story? Or were you like, I'm going to break this down? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I mean, where do you start biting?
I think it depended on the day. Some
Mhm.
days it felt really intimidating, and then other days it just happened. It just came out of me. I did write most of Sirens of Memory on a sort of self-imposed / self-directed writer's retreat in Austin. And
Oh,
so in
cool.
3 weeks, I went from basically it was a total of 5 weeks, but I had 3 weeks in Austin and 2 weeks in San Francisco with family. And I basically had an outline, which I don't usually do, but I did it for this book. And then I think I wrote about 3,000 words a day. And then by the time I left San Francisco, I went on a work trip for my freelance work, and I had finished it, which was, I never expected to be able to do that. And I don't think I'll ever be able to replicate that pace on another book, but it was pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
So 3 weeks in Austin, 2 weeks in San Francisco, and you just banged it out in 5 weeks. That's amazing. Oh my God. And then how long after that in terms of rewriting, how long did it take you? Because that's your speed. Teach me your ways, woman. Teach me your ways. How long did it take you after that?
So I did, I think, a couple of big rounds of revision, not really replotting or anything like that, but definitely bringing out more details, going back, um, talking to people again, doing a little bit of restructuring. And so that's sort of I want to say it was 6 to 8 months after that I had the first original polished draft.
Mhm.
And that is actually the draft that Chantel with Polis Books saw, and that all happened by chance on the publication process. And then, so with her, I did one other major edit, which was, I think, about 2 months total. I did go on another writer's retreat for about 2 weeks to kind of facilitate that, because I moved the timeline around a little bit when I wrote that outline. That edit, excuse me.
Cool. Anissa would like to know, how close was the final draft to your outline? Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating question, Anissa. So you sit down, you think to yourself, I know what this book's going to be about. And it just, and you put it up on some Post-it notes and you pin it around. And then at the end of the day, when you were holding Sirens of Memory in your hand, did it look nothing like that? Was it exactly like that? Anissa, I love this question. Puja, give us the skinny.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will admit freely that it has been very different with each book. For Sirens of Memory, it actually wasn't too far off the original outline.
Mm-hmm.
But the big change was originally so now the book is basically in 2 timelines. So you follow the story of how Mariam escapes Kuwait during the Gulf War, and then you, alongside her journey in Austin 25 years later, and how the Tareq, her ex-husband, finds her. So that was the biggest change. Originally, it was written as one big flashback within sort of the modern day story. And I think it works much better in the 2 timelines. But I did spend, especially on that last 2-week retreat, some time with a spreadsheet, like writing out which scenes are going to be in which timeline and all of that stuff. And then I added some more stuff about her daughter. That was the other big change in the final revision. So I guess maybe it was 75% ish from the outline, but then pretty restructured in terms of where the scenes went.
Very cool. Kate Holohan, USA Today bestselling author, raves that Sirens of Memory takes the classic movie Sleeping with the Enemy, starring Julia Roberts, to new heights. It is a tense and touching exploration of domestic abuse set against the backdrop of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. I was frantically turning the pages to learn what happened to Mariam and if she gets to keep her hard-won freedom. Rave review there from USA Today bestselling author Kate Hallahan. Let's talk about, from a craft perspective, how do you think you pull that off? What is the key to writing a book? I'm just popping it up here quickly. That keeps someone, quote, frantically turning the pages, because I think so many books start out strong. Like you read the back cover and you think, ooh, tasty, but then when you get into it, you're about halfway through, it kind of peters off. How do you keep someone turning those pages frantically, Puja? Puja.
I think the restructured timeline really helps keep up the suspense. It keeps up the pace, because so when things are moving during the Gulf War, initially when Mariam escapes her husband and then takes refuge in the camp, there's tons of stuff happening in that timeline. And at the beginning of the timeline in Austin, in a modern day, she starts going to therapy. She's trying to deal with her PTSD, but she hasn't been located yet by Tareq, and she doesn't know anything about him being alive. So it's a little bit slower there, while it's really fast on the Gulf War side. And then it sort of starts to switch. And I think that really helps to kind of show, one, the contrast between the 2 time periods, and then 2, keep up the pace of the suspense.
Mm.
And then the other piece is just, and this was really fun, but a little bit harrowing to write myself, was just the number of like cat and mouse type of things that happen between her and Tareq. Like,
Mhm.
he almost runs into her at this event at the Kuwaiti embassy, and then he almost runs into her at the embassy itself the next day because he's seeing his niece. And it's just all these like little things where they almost find each other, and then fast forward until you hit the actual confrontation.
So do you feel like that cat and mouse, that cat and mouse game of the fear of being discovered, Miriam's fear of being discovered, of being found by this abusive, violent guy, that was one of the methods you deployed to crank that tension up, keep us frantically turning the pages?
Absolutely. And, initially a lot of that's in her own head. She kind of sees him everywhere, even though
Right.
at this point he has no idea where she is. And
Mhm.
then suddenly he does. And there we are. Yeah.
Very cool. Puja, what do you want people to take from this book? They've spent these time. I feel like for me, the point of reading a book is to get to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, to see life through their eyes, get a peek into a world or a culture or a people or a woman, an experience that is not the life that I have lived. Um, so having spent this time in your pages, in Miriam's life, what do you want people to walk away having felt, having learned, having experienced? What's that look like?
I think it goes back to the universality that you mentioned. So, we've all experienced different types of trauma, childhood, later in life, whatever it is. And I think that there's so much that we can do afterwards to move past it, but at the same time that it really can stay with us. And I think that as humans, we sometimes have a habit of pushing that away and pretending it didn't happen, or just moving on as if everything is fine, as soon as we can. And I think that from a mental health perspective, is simply not actually how we recover. That's how we basically cover it up and kind of put it in the pressure cooker. And eventually it comes back, because when it's in the pressure cooker, if you don't release the pressure, it explodes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is that would as you have written other books, of course, is that a theme that you are interested in exploring, or was this just, is that a lifelong theme that you are sort of fascinated by and play with in, possibly future stories, or is that just you did it and you're done and now you're moving on to other things?
I think from the abuse standpoint, I haven't written anything else specifically looking at that. From
Mhm.
the sort of dealing with different types of trauma, absolutely. The spy thriller series that I write, the main character Petra, she has dealt with a lot in terms of operations that have gone bad, and feeling like, you know the people that she's lost, all of that is her fault, and kind of trying to recover from that.
Mm.
And
That's your Ahirman series. Am I saying that right? I hope.
Ahriman, that's fine.
Perfect. Ahirman. No, I want to get it right, Pusha. So thank you. I want to remind everyone to grab your copy today from Murder by the Book. So I am going to pop it right here into the comments, and you can grab your copy of Sirens of Memory. It has such a beautiful cover. And I let people submit questions in advance in my Mystery and Thriller Mavens group. So, because some people can't join us live and they watch later, which is the great thing about on-demand viewing. So, Pooja, someone was asking about the cover of this book. Did you get input into it? Did you have any suggestions, or did they just surprise you with it?
I mean, Chantel sent it over to me and it was basically perfect. I think we made one minor tweak to the font, but it was incredible. So originally, when I thought that I would indie publish this book, I had a different cover. Before I ended up sort of being connected to Polis books, and they ended up buying the book. And so they saw that cover, but which was a good one, but they definitely transcended it and far, far exceeded my expectations. It's just perfect. Yeah, I couldn't have asked for anything better. I mean, we didn't even have to do any iterations. It's just like the sort of broken glass feel around, and the sentiment behind the image of her in the headscarf is just perfect.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. All right, everybody, we have 5 minutes left. So get your questions going for Puja. Anything you want to ask about Sirens of Memory, her other books, the Ahiraman series, her writing process, anything you want, now's your time. Get it going in the questions, and I will get it right over to her. Puja, let's talk about, I noticed that that you only give your Twitter link, even though you are on Instagram. What's your relationship to social media like? Do you love it, hate it, loathe it, accept it? You only tweet? What is a distraction from your writing? What's going on? Do you like it, love it, other? Love,
I mean,
loathe
I
it?
think that social media can be a wonderful connecting tool, all kinds of great things. For me, talking about my writing and my books on social media has always felt like work, so it's not something that I've done much with. I do sort of have all the accounts, and I respond to any direct messages that I get, but I am terrible at sending out word about what I'm doing there. For some reason, and not that this is easy for me, but for some reason, the newsletter that I keep with my mailing list comes a little easier. But still, even that, that's also its own struggle. But
It's
social media, for some reason, just is really tough for me, unless it's very simple and just kind of direct messaging, that kind of thing.
Well, it's great to know, everybody. So if you read the book and you have any questions for Puja, you can jump on Twitter or Instagram. I'm plopping the links into the comments right now and ask her. And now we know that she responds. You can slide into her DMs, as the cool kids say, and
Absolutely.
she will reply. Not everyone does, so that is lovely. Puja, what are you working on next? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm working on the 5th book in my spy thriller series, which
Yay.
just as a quick background, so Petra, my main protagonist, she is a former spy who kind of keeps trying to leave the business. And the sort of second protagonist is a former assassin who's now sort of trying to be good. And the series kind of follows the two of them, initially a very protagonist antagonist relationship, and then how they start to work together. And so this will be, I believe, the final book in the series, and has
Ooh.
them both returning to Iran, which is where everything went wrong. So that is, especially going back to what you were saying about the trauma themes, it brings a lot up for both of them, because they fled and were planning never to go back, and now they have to. So that's
Ooh.
um
Already tense.
yeah, absolutely.
Ooh, great question, Susan. She would like to know, what writer do you enjoy reading, Puja?
Oh, I mean, there's so many, but my absolute all-time favorite is definitely Frederick Forsyth. He is certainly, if I was going to choose one writer who inspired me to write, even though when I first read some of his works, I was very young and I had no idea I would ever write. But yeah, I remember reading Icon and The Day of the Jackal, and The Dogs of War when I was in middle and high school, and maybe a little bit young for those books, but I just fell in love with them. And he put me into that genre, and so grateful for it.
Very cool. Alan, great question. He says, if this is the end of the series, what will be next?
I haven't decided yet. I mean, there's so many ideas, different works that I want to put together. All of it will definitely be internationally focused in some form, because that's me. I grew up all over, and get to travel all over. Well, pre-pandemic, I did anyway, for my freelance work. So that's been one of the really fun things, is like featuring different places that I've gotten to visit. Mozambique, Sudan, Guinea-Bissau, Argentina, in my work. And I also get to, in some places are tougher than others, where it's beautiful, but the local population may be suffering more or whatever. And I get to kind of rework that a little bit depending on what I'm
Mm.
doing there.
I love that. Pooja, as a woman traveling to some incredibly socioeconomically challenged places that sometimes then can also feel unsafe places. How do you navigate that as a woman? Do you feel unsafe? Have you ever felt unsafe? How do you overcome that? Or maybe you just feel fine.
It really depends on the place. I mean, I think the biggest theme is talking to people who have either spent time there or live there. That's the easiest source of real information. 'Cause there's a big difference between, I think, feeling unsafe and actually being unsafe, depending where you are. I think Sudan is the best example there. So Khartoum, the capital, is actually extremely safe from
Hmm.
a sort of violent crime perspective.
Mhm.
The big joke is that you can walk around in the middle of the night and nothing will happen to you. Somebody might ask you, like, are you okay? But they're not gonna, nobody's gonna bother you, nobody's gonna steal anything from you,
Wow.
nobody's even gonna try to sell anything to you, which is, in a lot of more touristy places, if you're obviously a foreigner, that's a big thing that
Yeah.
happens. Um, but from a civil unrest perspective, Sudan is much more tenuous. So it's just kind of keeping a gauge on that. And you can feel that part. At least I think that you can, when civil unrest is sort of brewing in the air. There's kind of a weird sense. It's like this heaviness around you, and you try not to be outside a lot during that, just within reason, go to the market, do whatever you're doing, and then kind of hunker down and just sort of wait and see. But that usually, I think in general, that feeling comes around for a few weeks before anything bad actually happens, out on the street, where as a random bystander, you might actually feel something.
That's so interesting because I remember before in the days of yore when we still went to really big in-person events, I went to see Trevor Noah, and he was talking about how he had read the survey that asked American women, if you weren't afraid, if you could do anything at any time, if you could live a completely fearless life, what would you do? And the majority of the responses were, I would go for a walk at night by
Mhm.
myself. Like I would just feel free to go for a walk. And I live in a city. I live in a city and in Boston, a super safe city. I would not go for a walk by myself at night, just out strolling at 3 a.m. You know,
Yeah.
I I might be fine, but I just wouldn't feel safe to do that as a woman today, in 2022. So it's so fascinating to me that Sudan, which I think to many of us feels so far away, feels foreign or scary or different or exotic or whatever those words are, is actually a place where a woman can go for a stroll at night and be completely safe. I mean, how amazing is that? That's so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, and I completely agree with you. I mean,
I
live
didn't
in
know
a
that about Sudan. I've learned so much today. Yay. All right, y'all. I see we are out of time. So I just want to thank you all for watching. And I will see you at the top of the hour with Lisa Lutz. So stay tuned and I will see you then. Puja, thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about Sirens of Memory. And we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks to Murder by the Book and Mystery Mavens. Thank you. This was
Yay!
amazing.
Yay! All right, everybody, thank you so much. And I will see you in a few.